Are you all set? Yeah, okay. So welcome to the February meeting of the Hexham Town Council, 30th February in the private hall of Hexham. So first of all, we're going to ask any questions from our residents. Any questions? Questions, please?
I'm Wendy Bridge, and in light of the update we're going to be receiving tonight about district heating, I know that the Town Council acknowledges the desperate need for affordable housing in Hexham, and also the urgency of the climate crisis, and hence the climate change team working on things like this, hopefully renewable district heating schemes. I wonder if there can be some joined up thinking about the use of NCC owned land for affordable housing, the middle school site, to use a district heating scheme.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, we'll ask that question. Anybody else? Thank you. Right, apologies for absence.
Councillors Bell, Domain, Pearson and O'Farrell.
Okay, number 3, declarations of interest. Right, so Matt, are you ready for your presentation?
Yes.
Right, okay, well, what was the Matt Baker of Northern County Council?
Hi everybody, thanks for coming along. Apologies that Hannah from my team in liaison is unwell today, so don't bother with me. So any kind of very detailed questions about waste, I'll defer. So I've got an update on district heating, and I'll focus a little bit on Hexham, but I'll sort of give you a bit of a kind of broad overview as well, if that's okay. So I'll try and describe how this links into the kind of corporate priorities for the council as well. So you can read that as you guys know, we declared climate emergency 2019 with a kind of net zero carbon target by 2030. Just worth kind of being quite precise. Some guys will have heard us say this before about the impact of methane and NOx. So we've got methane and NOx data now, and we're just sort of working through what that means in practice. That isn't in the 2030 target because it wasn't in the data when we did that work. So we'll effectively complete that activity as part of the work we're doing over the next sort of 6 months as we create the next 3-year action plan. Really important to note that the council's got 3 key priorities: of growth, inequalities, value for money. And the reason why I'm late is because I had a meeting with our new chief exec, so I couldn't really hurry her up, although I did tell her I had to leave because I was going to Hexham Town Parish Council. One of the things that she said, which sort of just connects us, I think it's really important for everyone to hear, is that climate change cuts across all 3 of these priorities. So I would argue it's the most important priority, but I would give them my views on climate change. But it is a kind of key part of what the council's doing. And specifically, although we're going to talk about district heating, there are really kind of strong examples around how that links into inequalities around, you mentioned social housing as a kind of really good example, and the link between a just transition and inequality. Clearly a link in terms of growth, and we're going to talk about district heating, and that's probably one of the main areas of growth that we can see in terms of net zero. And then a number of things around value for money, which are really connected to kind of end use saving across the estate that we're focused on. So what does that kind of mean in practice? So that's just sort of what we mean by district heating in the context of growth. I'm not going to kind of read through that because I want to get into a little bit of detail about where we are with district heating more broadly. But if you've been to the kind of county councillors in the room who've been to the policy conferences, you'll have kind of heard us talk about this in that forum as well. So in terms of district heating, what's the big context? So Northumberland County Council emissions drop into 3 buckets, as everybody by now who's heard me speak will know: transport, heat and power. And in order to kind of tackle the heating aspect of climate change, what we've modelled is that 70% of homes and 50% of businesses need to be connected to a low carbon heat source in our that's 7 major towns, of which Hexham is obviously one. And what does that mean in practice? That either means, at the moment, a district heat network or a low carbon heat pump. So if we think about somewhere like Hexham, which has probably got like 8,500 residents, sort of, kind of give or take, more, bigger. 14,000 residents, so that'd probably be about 11,000 homes. So that would be 11,000 different implementations of retrofit and a low carbon heating solution. There are probably kind of two problems with that. One, I don't know if there's enough tradespeople to do 11,000 separate installations. And I also don't know if there's enough kit, i.e. heat pumps and insulation to do that. So district heating becomes a really important part of the solution for Hexham. And remember those numbers, 70 and 50%. So we've done a bit of work and looking basically not just the top 7, but the top 8 towns by population. And what we now understand is that there's probably a district heating scheme, as I would describe it, for Northumberland. And that scheme has probably got 8 different locations, of which Hexham is one. We'll talk a bit more about Hexham in a second, but where are those schemes? So this is roughly where they are on the map. The eagle eye will notice there are 7 flags on there, not 8, and that's because the flag which is over Ashington Blythe actually kind of overlaps 2 different district heating schemes, one in Blythe and one in Ashington. Now there's something really, you could say lucky, but I would like to say a strategic advantage for the county, but let's say lucky. But if you look across those 8 different schemes, 5 of them are very close to sources of either waste industrial heat or energy that is already at the surface of the county, as opposed to some areas where to get a district heating scheme and make it viable, you've basically got to drill quite significant wells, either into existing mine shafts of water or actually into sort of geothermal sources. So the fact that these are actually at the surface already means we immediately kind of save on a big chunk of the district heating work. We don't have to do that exploration work. It's much more about how we capture it from that natural source. The 2 areas, and I'll talk about the 8th in a second, which don't, are connected into a potential river source solution, which is also a kind of viable solution for a district heating scheme. And the 8th area actually could be waste industrial heat. It's up in Berwick, but could also be river source, and there's sort of a little bit of optionality around that scheme depending on what the organisation up in Berwick may want to do. So that's the kind of the overall picture. The really important thing for the whole county is that when you look at all 8 together, they actually make economic sense. So one of the things which we'll talk about in a second in terms of what we're trying to do is get a partner who's interested in the whole county rather than looking at every single scheme on an individual basis. So a little bit of detail about Hexham. Well, that's probably that's Hexham. So this is Hexham. The darker the colour means the greater demand for heat. So as part of this study, we've basically mapped where the kind of biggest uses of. We've actually done heat, power, and cooling. This is just the kind of the heat map. And although it doesn't sort of render perfectly on this monitor, in terms of what we're kind of looking at, you guys know Hexham just as well as I do, but sort of down, I can't see it particularly well on this map, but down here, down the bottom end, is where Egger is, as you guys know. So it's worth sort of just talking about the other half of this equation, which is where does this industrial heat come from? So if I had a pound every time somebody said to me, oh, surely there's heat to be, kind of reused from Egger. The answer, of course, is yes. It doesn't take a scientist to kind of go and look at Egger and see the energy that's coming out of there. What you might not know about Egger, Egger is a fantastic, I'm going to say this because I'm kind of live streaming, but it's a fantastic place and well-run place. Is they reuse a lot of that heat in their processes, which is an absolutely tremendous example of the kind of circular economy. So whilst there is some excess heat, there might be as much as you think. That said, with a number of, let's just call them sort of modifications to their sites, there is definitely enough energy there to kind of provide district heating into Hexham. So we have a load, we have a demand, and really now the kind of the difficult part is how do you kind of connect these two things together, which I'll now kind of come on to. So without me going into kind of too much detail, because I'm kind of conscious of time, and there's some complexity to this, which would take me too long to explain clearly. The current process that's been designed by central government is fabulous for city centre, large-scale district heating schemes, which are either run by private sector companies who will let the market forces set the price for energy. They're also good for authority-run district heating schemes. What they're not good for is net zero by 2050, I would say, or net zero by 2030, because the schemes are, the way they're kind of currently set up, they don't let the private sector do what they need to do, and they also don't let the local public sector do what they need to do. So they're kind of, they're not ideally suited to what we're trying to do, both locally and nationally. So we're having a lot of conversations at the moment with Department of International Trade, BEIS, and the Department of Levelling Up, or the department formerly known as BEIS, I should say, about a model which kind of sits in the middle. A model which basically allows us to attract in the private sector, attract in that investment, attract in that expertise, but also stay true to an important set of principles around price of energy, energy security, local jobs. So we're trying to, kind of, for those people who know me, kind of classic map, trying to find that kind of middle way between the two options. So we're currently going through a process which looks at these 11 kind of key outcomes or principles. And these are the principles which, if somebody comes in and benefits from the assets we have in this county, both in terms of the assets that we have physically, but also our population and some of the public sector assets we have that could use these district heating schemes. These are the different principles which they would need to abide by. And I'm currently going through a bit of an exercise with the team, effectively doing a number of things which are kind of outlined on this slide. And there's too much detail in here to kind of really get your head around. But the key things really are, one, we want to understand what the private sector want to bring to this equation, given those principles. Two, we want to understand what government can do to kind of help facilitate and support that. And three, we need to make sure that the owners of the waste industrial heat are on board with what we're doing. And which in one case is the Coal Authority Board, because it's the mine water out of line. But in Hexham, that is obviously is Egger. And we've met with Egger, and actually met with their district heating expert, who's just so happened to be kind of over in the UK when we met with them. And the first thing to know is they are good at this and do this in other countries and are really kind of keen. Obviously, they're a commercial business and need to make their own choices to kind of play an active role in this for Hexham and for the community. So the kind of current, if you like, mission or goal is to try and get in place a partner to work with us on a kind of county-wide basis to pick probably 2 or 3 of the kind of 8 that we currently have to kind of get going with. And ideally to try and have that partner in place. I would like them in place by the summer. The legal people who are advising described that idea as madness, unquote. So I said, how about the autumn? And they said that might be possible. But we're talking about going fast. Why? Because by 2030, to hit net zero, we need to connect 50% of businesses and 70% of homes into these networks, and we need energy security, and we need a sustainable energy price. So this, this is a climate emergency. We need to behave like it is an emergency, not just talk like it is. So that's the end of the kind of the slides. Happy to take any questions. I'll answer to the best.
Matt, did you say that the Hexham district heating plant was for river source?
No, I said it was for waste industrial heat out of
Industrial heat?
out of like,
Was that
Yes.
Dale, was it you or was it? Penny.
That was very interesting, thank you. And I actually know very little about this. I'm going to first ask my basic question and then ask the second question. So in order for the people of Hexham to access this sort of heat, do their houses need retrofitting?
ideally not to begin with is the answer to that question.
Right, okay, because something that came up in another presentation that we had was about new builds.
Yeah.
And how that because of the cost of materials, they were actually not being built in a way that would make any form of retrofitting easy. And so I was wondering as a planning authority whether those dots could be joined up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't say planning, but happy to take planning questions away. But the whole purpose of the district heating scheme to begin with is to kind of get the load used on a stable basis. So you start by connecting into, leisure centres, hospitals, businesses, etc. Then connecting to domestic. And then, and this is the kind of beauty of the district heating, as the retrofit market kind of kicks in, then you would obviously want to make energy saving measures in your home like everybody would when time and budget allows. That would then free up some of the heat to then connect into the next property like kind of cascade model. So it sort of breaks that that kind of relationship, if you like. That's sort of part of what is there.
Yeah, thank you.
You spoke about investment of around £200 million.
Yes.
What do you think proportionally that's between the public and private sector, bearing in mind the public sector in terms of austerity is cutting back? And we've seen the response of energy companies who've released figures far beyond their expectation, and they've not hit their targets at all and set about making profit. Is the only way this system's going to work if there's a degree of enforcement?
So a few questions there, so I'll take the funding one then talk about the enforcement one. So in terms of the funding one, so part of this kind of model that we're developing is, I think, all the money should come out of the private sector. They may end up bidding into BEIS or into government for kind of funding to sort of match that. I don't think there's an appetite in the council to take £200 million of debt onto the balance sheet. So for lots and lots of reasons. So, and again, it's back to like what the council's good at and not good at. We're not a banker, so let's not try and pretend we're a bank. We're not an energy company. Let's not pretend we're an energy company. So I think the funding needs to come out of the private sector. I think there's a big conversation we have between the private sector and central government around how that's funded. Department of International Trade think this is a £60 billion industry. If you just kind of do the math on people's energy bills, and I'll come to the enforcement question, versus what this could generate in terms of income for that market, it's quite significant. And then it gets interesting because you want people like, I was talking to a company in Europe who currently don't work in the UK, who want to come into the UK to displace some of that market. So there's some really kind of useful market dynamics that we can kind of, I think, get real value from as a council. In fact, as a county, I should say. Enforcement's interesting. So if we draw parallel to kerosene and off gas grid properties, currently, although it's not particularly well publicised, I'm not sure it's in legislation or it's just guidance, but by 2026, you're not going to be allowed to replace a kerosene boiler like for like. So we've already got enforcement of low carbon heating in certain settings. It's already here. We just don't necessarily realise it. So the current strategy that government's talking about is district heat zones. So effectively they'll, not as simple as this, I don't think, and I'm really worried I'm on telly and recorded, but they'll disconnect the gas and connect you into district heating. And then there's a question about, well, how will the government administer the price cap? And that needs kind of clearly working through so that the price counterfactual, back to energy security, energy price, inequalities and fuel poverty, doesn't kind of run, kind of ahead of itself. So is that enforcement? Well, I mean, I guess technically at the moment you're sort of forced to take gas, aren't you? If you live in the gas grid, you could choose not to, but price would say you are. So I wouldn't use the word enforcement, but there's definitely going to be infrastructure that people are going to want to tap into, like a broadband, like a heat network. It's the right thing for them. Whether that's enforcement or not, I'm not sure, but I think it's going to be made attractive for people to connect into these things.
Just one supplementary question. Landlords, we had a scheme here before some of the current councillors were involved of getting energy from the River Tyne to power Hexham as such, a scheme that was supported by government grants, and the landlord failed to move.
The Archimedes screw you're talking about in the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few things around the Archimedes screw. The first thing is the power output from the Archimedes screw would be tiny. So it wouldn't actually be that useful, if I'm perfectly honest, in terms of its kind of solution. It'd be kind of engineeringly cool, but it wouldn't actually make the kind of difference you're talking about. For this scheme to work, EGA will probably need to build its own power factory, its own CHP is the kind of terminology, which will be like 7-8 times bigger than the Archimedes screw. So on the bit about the landlords and things, that's I'm not a politician, I leave it to people better qualified than myself. I'm not so worried about whether that is part of the solution or not.
Thank you.
John.
Thanks. I presume because Eggers on the north side of the river and most of the housing's on the south side of the river, there will at some point be a pipe going from one to the other. That would look rather rude, I think. It could be camouflaged and made beautiful by having a pedestrian or cycling bridge incorporated into that structure. Would that be an idea?
Well, so there's something really interesting about how we kind of join things up. So I don't know the exact dates, but not to alarm everybody, but the weir will need refreshing in the next, I think, 5 to 10 years. Otherwise, the bridge will fall into the weir. It's not urgent. It's not going to happen like overnight, and it'll be done in good time. So there'll be something about, can we move some of that build forward? Can we move some of the other build a bit later to kind of align these two things and sort of remodel and redesign how that works? And then, of course, at that point, lots of things are open, aren't they, in terms of how do you design the crossing and what do you do with the weir and the dam, which again will be on my technical capability. But this is a really important point that you've raised, because the reason why I want to partner in now is so we stop theorising about some of these things in a kind of desk-based way. We actually bring in a company who's got engineers and designers and architects. So they're designing and doing the theory in a way which is taking on board things like that, and taking on board the reality of what we need to do, not just the kind of the theory of it. So I think the more of those ideas, which I've read the paper with great interest on active transport, the more of these ideas about Hexham that we can pour into this scheme, the better, because that's another way that we can benefit from that private sector investment. We can get multiple value from every pound that they bring into the community.
Do you mind if I just go back to your first slide? So it's not directly linked to district heating per se. You made reference to the fact that most of the emissions come from agriculture. Bulk of the emissions come from agriculture.
On methane and NOx.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's one of those things, isn't it, that a lot of people don't want to talk about, I think, necessarily. It's a bit of an inconvenient, awkward truth. And you put in line with the NFU. I just wonder what you mean by that, and whether you're doing any active work with farmers on how to reduce these.
Everyone, I would, on terms of agriculture, I think it's really important that we talk about it for loads of reasons. One, agriculture is not the biggest; it's probably like the second biggest part of the economy. So, part of the solution can't be not to have agriculture, because we'll have a whole different problem in terms of inequalities and food and things. So we have to talk about it, and we have to kind of do that in a really sensible way. County Hall is full of people who are also farmers, it seems, so we do talk about this quite a lot. In terms of the NFU piece, so our kind of thinking on this at the moment is the National Farmers Union have to crack this for the country. We are the biggest farming county in the country, so why would we benefit from that knowledge and that expertise and all the buy-in that they kind of get through that? So that's why that's the kind of alignment point. So what have we done so far, to answer the last question? So the leader of the council actually kicked off a study with the farming community, looking at a raft of policy things connected to sort of whether we should go, kind of big farming, small farming, whether we should do, regenerative farming, the whole kind of gambit of farming policy, and that was done by Newcastle University kind of on our behalf, and that paper is sort of out there and being published. And what we're kind of currently doing is we've actually taken that and we're, I can say this because it's the truth. So we're bidding for a piece of work into Innovate UK, to specifically with there's a specific group called the Rural, what they call the kind of the Rural Development Group, I think that's their name. Nick Johnson, who works with me, is kind of leading on this, to get some specific funding to try and accelerate this. So do I have an answer on all of the kind of different things that we're doing? We're going to do the plan, no. But the idea is that in the next action plan, which we'll be publishing towards the end of this year, we'll either have a section specifically on this, we might even have a parallel action plan which is just dedicated to NOx and to methane and what we're going to do. And like on the previous action plan where we said, here are some things we're going to investigate and then we'll report back, district is a good example. So if you look at the first action plan, it says, we're going to do some studies, we're going to report back, and then we're going to, in the next action plan, talk about, things that are shovel ready. That's kind of exactly what we've done. So we'll follow the same suit with agriculture. Really important point on the data. Our emissions position is pretty good in terms of carbon, so it's 651 kilotons is the net position for the county. Basically, when you throw methane and NOx in, it doubles. So we're under no illusion how difficult that is and how important that is. And we know we need to do that work. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I love this. I've obviously talked about the exciting projects that you've got brewing there, and I was really disappointed as well, Stephen, when the Hydro project fell down in 2016, 2017, wasn't it? And these are all things that should have happened, in my opinion, loads earlier. And I know I worked with you recently. I love the ideas of clean energy and these community energy projects, but as we know from last year, our homes are the worst insulated in Europe. They are. And I'm wondering if the second round of the Warmer Homes funding coming on, what the uptake was like for the first round in Hexham, and going forward, whether you're working with the sort of social housing providers on the second round.
So I don't have the numbers in my head on the
But was it a good I mean, in your opinion, did it go well here? Or?
So I would say, as that kind of question kind of broadly, I think so we kind of go back through the history, just probably important for people to kind of know the context. So we did a piece of work on the original kind of schemes where we were working a bit as a supplier into, what's the word now, a client into one of the big 6 energy companies. And that work didn't go so well for loads of reasons, which I'm probably not going to unpack given this is a public meeting. So we then made a decision to kind of pivot and move that internally. That's taken quite a bit of time to kind of get up and running. That has done 2 things. One, giving us a much greater understanding how to kind of run these schemes, but 2, it has slowed things down. So the kind of the delivery on those schemes has not been, to be honest, as good as I would have hoped. What that means, though, and I can talk about one thing but not another thing. So there has been a new round of funding called the Home Upgrade Grants, which I'm under embargo by BEIS as to what I can say, so I can't say very much. but we'll be able to make an announcement around that sort of in the spring. And what we've managed to do as part of that, though, is now build a much stronger infrastructure, which means I'm a lot more confident in the rate at which we can upgrade. Candidly, that won't help Hexham because it's specifically targeted at people off the gas grid for the reasons I was just talking about before around the kerosene boilers. However, there's a scheme called the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, or we're currently on version 4. And the government's changed the rules around that scheme, and that scheme's available to anybody. Now, previously that was means tested on income and benefits in a similar way to a lot of the schemes. But as we've discussed, I think, in this forum and discussed quite a lot with other people, that kind of misses the point a little bit in terms of the climate emergency. So the government's actually changed the rules on those slightly, and they're now making it not means tested on income, but means tested on council tax band. So if you live in a property which is A, B, C, or D inclusive, that scheme becomes available to you. Now, what we're currently trying to do, because the infrastructure around the kind of qualification and the sort of the coordination is very similar to the grants we're doing, is we're looking at how we can effectively utilise those two things together and offer that as a potential route into that scheme for residents, which could help Hexham. And the numbers around that scheme are quite eye-watering. So basically, the government's put in 5 billion between now and 2026, which is a lot. And there is no cap on that in terms of areas, and it's not distributed by areas. So let's say hypothetically, everybody in Hexham who was council tax band D and above, and I don't know that number, but what I do know is there were 66,000 homes in Northumberland that are D and above. If all applied and all were successful, everyone would be eligible for measures who were in that group, which would obviously be, of the 151,000 homes we have, would be a decent proportion.
Thank you.
Right, well, thank you so much, Matt. It's been a fascinating presentation. Every time you come, you sort of take us on another journey. I think the certainly combined heating and plant that I did mention, CHP, would be very interesting to the whole of Hexham. You mentioned that there's only a few years before the bridge being repaired, and that might offer an opportunity to either, I'm taking the pipe would actually be underwater or attached to the bridge in some way, not.
Going to play the not an engineer card.
I imagine it, some sort of thing. We're quite fascinated to see such an engineering structure in. But I mean, I've been to Egger and had the tour and seen the heat plant coming up there. And it's a fascinating place to visit. And I'd encourage any council who gets the opportunity to go, because it's an amazing factory to see how that's all automated. And the generation of the heat that comes out of there, if that could be moved to some big organisations in the town. We've got big sports centres, hospitals, supermarkets, hotels, etc. Those is a starting point, and then into the public realm would be a really positive move for Hexham's climate change ambition. Yes. But we look to see you in a visitation in another time. Would you be interested in that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I can actually make, hopefully, when life allows this time, the next event that you've got actually it's in here, isn't it? I think so.
The net zero thing,
Yes, that's it.
18th of March.
Yes.
In the Abbey, I hope so.
Yeah, there are no driving tests planned. Hopefully, there are no parental disasters.
We'll hope you for 5 minutes speech, Matt.
Yeah, that's fine. I can do 5 minutes.
Excellent. Oh, okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're now on to item 4, which is the 3 minutes of the 9th of page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Every content of those. Okay. Item 5, so matters arising not on the agenda or report anything. Not. Okay. Right, item 6, to receive a presentation, which we've already done, so we'll have this for that. 7, there's announcements. I was invited to a discussion on the future of fireworks night alongside Hexham Community Partnership, the Rotary Club, the Scouts, and Tyndale Lions. So we were discussing the art of the possible. It appears that the round table have reached the end of the capacity to deliver fireworks, and we should applaud them for all their work over decades that they've done for this town. It's always been a huge draw, and it's always been incredibly well run. And it's always, to me, I always think it's like the busiest night in the whole calendar of Hexham. So we should thank them for all those years and years of putting on such an event. But time's marched on. So those organisations that I was in discussion with, we're sort of exploring the art of the possible. Obviously, the first question is, do we want fireworks night? So there's a few conversations to be had in various organisations to see what can be done, and we'll report back once we've had a bit more information. But I am hopeful, but I'm always hopeful about everything. I'm a glass half full type of man. So I am hopeful that we can work something out, but it will need quite a lot of effort from the various organisations who I've spoke about to try and come together as a joint unit to deliver something I think is very worthwhile, very traditional for Great Britain, and very, I always say the public turn up in their droves to come do fireworks night, and you'd like to think that's we can continue such an event. It just adds to the richness of life in Hexham. So if I get some more information, I shall be sharing that, but I won't go into too much detail at this point. We're still exploring. The next event, I was invited to a free army concert by a young man called Christo Arjan, who performed at the piano in Hexham Abbey, which was fantastic. So that afternoon, just him playing the piano, and I was quite good attendance for that, and it was really nice, relaxing, and just to hear the Abbey alive to live music and seeing a young man who's 21 years old performing in such a way. I did ask if I could go and do
Neil Sedaka days are over.
You still try.
And of course, we had the tragic news of Colin Newton and the death. So I'm going to first of all ask if we can stand and do a minute silence. Thank you. So, obviously that was a tragic news, and probably the saddest news to be delivered in Hexham in many, many long years. For a young girl of 15 to be stabbed and died on the streets of Hexham. It's astonishing news. I attended the bandstand along with many other councillors and lots of the public to honour Holly's life. I presented some flowers along with many other people to the bandstand. But I was really touched by how many people actually turned up, the braveness of the family to actually be there in front of all those people, the family to speak at the bandstand and, in such a public manner after, something so shocking and awful had happened to their family. I think it just shows you what a community Hexham is and why we are so shocked at this, because this doesn't happen here, does it really? This just doesn't happen here. We pride ourselves on being a loving and kind and put together community. I think that was displayed at the bandstand when everybody, a lot of people just turned up just to honour Holly. Many people didn't know but actually felt the need to actually turn up and show their respects to the young girl's family that has suffered. I was quite taken by, I had numerous interviews to be done on live on BBC National, on ITV, on Sky and LBC. I did speak to the journalists off air and asked, why they're taking such a big interest in a national, how was something like this that had become such a national story. And they said it was because Hexham is such a quiet town, had its reputation, of recently being the happiest town in Great Britain, and for something as awful as this to happen on the streets, you had that extravagance of, positivity and have a place to live, and then something as awful as this happening on our streets. And that was the interest from their angle. It's like, awful as it sounds, it's like, these things, stabbing seem to happen on the major cities quite frequently, and I think everybody gets quite anaesthetised to that, which is just an awful thing to happen because people should be shocked by it. To happen in a small rural town, it just has an extra shock, that you believe you're in a safe place, we believe that our children have a nice life here, that isn't lots of crime on the streets. We've had the police here and told us all this, and there isn't a knife carrying culture in Hexham, not by any imagination, but this one-off event to take place on our streets is just shocking, and I'm sure the memory of this will last a long time in Hexham. So there's my announcements.
Yes, could I just add to that? Yeah, thank you, Craig. I do think it is a shock because of the sort of juxtaposition with the happier Hexham, but I think it does show that our children are just as affected by issues here as they are anywhere else in the country. And that week after it happened, certainly ongoing, the counsellors have been in the schools from NCC's wonderful Family and Child Services team, and they have been extended in the schools. They are now still on call for the children there who have been affected by it. I thought the vigil at the bandstand was, I haven't seen that show support before. It was quite incredible, and what the community partnership did to bring that together and the family to speak was just, I've had words failing me, frankly. But I do think, and I have asked as well at County Hall for a review into counselling services at school on the back of this as well, which has been granted. So I think I just would like this to be the end, not the beginning. And Hexham is a very special place, but these things do happen and will happen unless we, keep an eye on it and make sure things are in place going forward for everyone who's affected.
Okay, Steve.
I was grateful for your telephone call, Mr. Mayor. I have some experience in this when tragedies happen, when the least expected, and I've dealt with murders on a number of occasions. I think it's really important that the town council gives the lead on this, in terms of a lot of people want to do a lot of things, raising money for the family, for example, that's covered by the criminal injuries compensation thing, but I think there should be some sort of legacy that goes on after this, thought about, including others, more importantly, including the families. I've seen it done very well on some occasions, and I've seen it done very badly on too many occasions. So I would like to suggest, Mr. Mayor, that once things have settled down a little bit, that representatives of this council talk to the family, perhaps talk to all his friends, and see if we could come up with some sort of lasting legacy, that in a month's time, in a year's time, on anniversaries, that people have a place to go and remember, not necessarily down an alley in the dark or whatever, but where they can congregate safely and do something positive and remember in the way it should be remembered. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you for that, Stephen. Yes, certainly, I spoke to family members at the memorial of the bandstand, and obviously passed on the town councillors' thoughts, and certainly, we've engaged in a conversation to see what would be the appropriate thing to do. But obviously, there's a lot of things to happen first. Obviously, there's
It's going to be a passing of time.
indeed.
But we've got to remember and be quite sustainable here.
But obviously there's a funeral, there's a court case, and there's a lot of things, a lot of water to go under the bridge. But certainly, we're in conversation just to see what would be appropriate for. Right, so it's right, number 8 is to agree the accounts of payment and close, so pages 8, 9, and 10, and 11. Okay, those. Number 9, to know the draft minutes from the various committees. So we have the plan and infrastructure, page 12, 13, 14, and 15. Community engagement on 15, 16, and 17. Stephen,
If I could, I believe Councillor Pearson asked a question at the community engagement subcommittee. It's just around the community partnership and what their structure is going to be. And I know a number of us shared some concerns about how they were structured and whether they would be able to gain accreditation to be a charity, which is far more complicated than they believe it is. My question or request would be, can we have it in writing from them, bearing in mind how much we're giving granted, of how they believe they're going to structure themselves going forward? That would give us an opportunity, just as a check and balance, to make sure they're doing it properly. It's a genuine concern of mine, because the timescale they offered in a year, it was far too short, and they offered it 6 months ago. And it may be, from what I'm told, that it's, we're doing this, and they haven't really got down to do it. There's some jewels in the crown there, number 28. I know the forums split themselves up. There's a separate organisation there. But the community partnership is a real force of good in the town. And we've got to make sure that it's structured in such a way to take full advantage of the circumstances that will make them grow and prosper as well.
I certainly know from the last conversation I had, the did attempt for charitable status, but that just didn't come about, so that they are having a second attempt at it. Because as you quite rightly point out, it is quite a complex thing to do.
Could they just send us a note to that effect?
Sure.
And then it's just a marker in the sand?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously we have, our community engagement meeting, we have them in attendance all the time, so would you not just want to ask that question?
They won't be here this Thursday. Nine of them will be here this Thursday.
They won't be. I mean, do you want to do it that way, Steve? I do want something in.
I'd rather from the full council,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, but certainly, obviously, there's an open dialogue with the community partnership, which we haven't had before. You know, very good touch point there. So, yeah. Right. So, page 15 was the community engagement. 15, 16, 17, I've already done that one. Next one was page 18, which is the financial general purposes, which is page 18 and 19. So the next item is to agree the appointment of a staffing subcommittee. So the reason for this, probably the town council, to be honest. Obviously, our biggest costs are staffing costs, and we have several members of staff, both the administration side and those who work in the cemetery and outside the cemetery. So we've had a discussion about this, whether how do we manage the staff, and how do we, motivate and keep and ensure well-being, and make sure we've got, the right amount of capability, capacity within the town council. So it was lent itself that we thought that the wisest move is to have a staff subcommittee. So the question to the councillors is, do you agree that we should have a staffing subcommittee? Any discussion, any debate on that one?
Great.
Yeah, okay, so we'll go down that route. We'll draft up the terms of reference. It'll sit under the finance and general purposes, but obviously, so conversations will be via that and then in the full town council. So we'll come up with a terms of reference which is been semi-drafted up, and circulate that just to see how we've got the touching the right things. But it's all about, obviously, about capability, capacity, well-being of staff, training, etc. Those types of things. But I think it's certainly necessary. I don't know if it's just been a case of, obviously, we've been quite static with our turnover of people for a long time, but obviously, we've had some changes recently. And it just, I think it just needs some focus, really. Good. The next item is to receive correspondence.
Thank you. Correspondence received. Now e-news and chief executive bulletins and events. CAN e-news. Northumberland CPA support services e-bulletins and job trustee vacancies. Funding e-bulletin. Temporary traffic regulation orders relating to the Dipton House Junction to Westvale Farm Junction, Leeses Lane and Wanders Lane. A talk on the significance of historic buildings, which is on the 1st of February. Rural Services Network Seminar on the 22nd of February. Play Zone Stakeholder Workshop that was on the 31st of January. Health Watch Northumberland Chair Recruitment and Annual Survey. Sea Changes Coastal Fountain Fund 2023 from the NCC Climate Change Team. Neighbourhood Watch Crime Prevention Webinars. Norfolk Tyne Precept. West Northumberland Primary Care Network Patients Group. An invitation to the Available Light celebration at the Queen's Hall on the 16th of February. a public consultation event on the devolution deal on the 15th of February, and NCC combination of community.
So next item number 12, to agree exclusion of the public, so could I have that, agree please?
Great.
Great, thank you.